The game I'm reviewing today is a game that's been out for a couple of months, and I purposefully waited a few months to review the game because I wanted to see how it shook out in our group and how interested we were to continue playing it after our initial play. This one is Discover Lands Unknown, which is from Fantasy Flight Games, and it is the second game in their line of unique games, where every copy that you buy will be completely different. The other game that they made was Keyforge, the Richard Garfield card game. Well, this is a big box board game where every single component is unique to the copy you buy. There's a pool of cards and tokens and things that everybody gets a mixture, a combination of them to make your experience a little different. So let's take a look at Discover Lands Unknown.
Each player is deposited on a strange and unknown land and must fight for survival while searching for clues as they try to escape their fate. The map is created based on a scenario from the two different land types included in your copy. Each scenario gives you a number of cards that give you a bit of story and gives you your initial goal, which will often require you to find a particular location printed on the map tiles. Each survivor starts at the camp and has a number of stamina that they can spend to take actions during their turn. You can spend stamina to move yourself around the map, to explore map tiles that will place tokens that you can interact with, gather resources, build helpful tools and weapons using those resources, hunt game to claim raw meat and pelts, cook that meat so that you can eat it, gather water from the water supplies, combat the monsters, and interact with locations you find across the map. When you find a location on the map, it'll tell you which cards to draw and resolve. These cards will have more story elements on them that will often give you a choice. The choices you make will sometimes send you to other cards that will help or hinder you. Sometimes you'll get a special item or weapons. And if the location was the destination of your first clue, you move on to the next scenario card that will give you your next task. After all the players have taken their turn for the day, they'll have to camp for the night. A night card is drawn that will tell you how much food or water you need to consume. It'll also generate you more stamina, often depending whether you're at a campfire or not. The night card could also spawn monsters on the board or move existing monsters or force you to draw threat cards. Threat cards can do just about anything from placing more monsters on the map, spoiling your food, or magical curses can be placed on you. Now, monster attacks and threat cards and failing to consume food and water will cause you damage. There are 3 damage dials on your board that indicate physical damage, dehydration, starvation, and disease. Each time you take damage, tick one of those dials to the type of damage you took. If you ever have to take damage and all 3 of the dials are full, you are dead and eliminated from the game. The game continues as players march around the board, following up on leads until they finally complete the scenario mission and are saved from this perilous unknown world.
When this game was announced initially, there was a controversy about it. Was the unique concept great? Was it bad? Was it weird? Was the game going to be horrible? Was it too much to handle for Fantasy Flight to come up with this new grand concept for a game? And I think, at least my theory, is that a lot of people had a misconception about what this game was going to be going in. I think a lot of people thought this was going to be some sort of this weirdly unique game that no one ever has seen before, this new style of thing. And when they got it and played it or saw reviews of it, it was just a game. Because that really is all it is. It's just a game. If there was no unique concept to this at all, or you came into it, bought a copy of it, didn't even know what unique games are, this would just be a game like every other game that you've ever bought. And I think that may have tainted a lot of people's opinions of it. When I first played it, I very much liked it. I thought it was a little basic. There isn't a whole lot going on in the game, but that was after the first scenario. Now that I've kind of gotten into the later scenarios of the box, I feel as though that it got a little more meaty as it went on. So it's a survival game, a very similar style to Robinson Crusoe. Only Robinson Crusoe is an extremely complex cooperative game. This one is a very basic version of that. And I think it maybe is a little too basic, but I think that there are some merits to the basicness of it. For example, Robinson Crusoe is great, but if you haven't played it before and you're just learning it cold, or you're coming back after a year or two of not playing it, it's very difficult to get into. Wonderful game, but very difficult to get into because of its complexities. This is a game where literally I cannot teach the whole game to a new player, and they could get into it and start playing. And as things arise in the game, I say, this is how it works now. Because really all you can say is, all right, explain the stamina. You use stamina to take these actions. Your major goal is to look at the scenario card, try to find those locations and do those things on the scenario card. And you have to make sure you have food and water every turn because you might starve. You might start taking starvation damage or dehydration damage if you don't look out. And try not to die. And then say, okay, now you want to take that action, move over there, spend some stamina to do that. Spend some stamina to hunt for food. Spend some stamina to get some water out of that water source there. It's a very simple game that you could really get people into fast. And I appreciate that because it gets you into the game so quickly. And you can keep coming back to it and replaying it over and over without a headache of like, oh, are we doing something wrong? Are we like forgetting these rules and things? There's not a lot of gotcha rules in the whole thing. It's a very solid game, but it's very, very simplistic. The concept of survival and the food and water. I think it's actually a very interesting game in that respect because there's not a lot of food across the board and there's not a lot of water across the board. And for example, if you go hunting and you get 3 meat, that's great. That's 3 night cards that you could potentially negate by having that meat, but it's raw meat. You have to be by a fire to cook that meat. There's only 1 fire on the board and you're not going to stick around because you got to be going out exploring all these different places. You have to find more fire or just stick around the campfire. And so you have to make that meat, then you have the meat. And the water sources, there's only a few of them across the board and you're searching for them, but you can't stick near them because you need to explore. Some of the water sources could be tainted, could be dirty water, it could be poisoned. So there's a lot of things that you can pay attention to here and sort of ways that you can play. And if you're playing on a more cooperative style, you can work with other people. Oh, you're the water guy. You're going to go over here and make sure you get all the water, and you're going to, meet up with us over here and hand off the water. I'm going to go, hunting while the other guy explores. There's a lot of ways that you could handle this game that's very interesting from a cooperative standpoint. Now, the game's not cooperative at all. It's actually technically sort of competitive because there are winners and losers. If you die in the game, you're eliminated, which I'll get to in a minute. And if you die, you're eliminated from the game, meaning you lose, but the other players can still win. So you have to be kind of friendly about it, right? You want to help your companions to survive the game because it's not fun to be a jerk about it. So technically it's not fully cooperative, but playing cooperative is great. Now, player elimination is the other thing. In this game, you can easily get rid of dehydration and starvation by spending food when you rest. But if you're damaged by either a monster or an animal or some kind of threat card, you fall down and break your leg or something, and you take physical damage, there's really no way to heal that. There's a surgeon character that you might get in the box, but you might not get that character. And there might be some cards that let you heal, but for the most part, you just can't heal. So when you take that physical damage, you're going to die if you can't like keep yourself going. So if you're eliminated, that really sucks. Player elimination always sucks in any game. And this one is no different. Every game that we've played so far, somebody has died and has been hanging around watching the gameplay. And usually that person takes over and just starts reading the cards at that point. They're the sort of the facilitator of the game. Now, I will say that despite the fact that that sucks, Corey Konieczka posted a PDF of a fully cooperative version that takes away the player elimination if you choose to play in that way. It's a very easy thing to implement too. So Fantasy Flight's website has that. So they've sort of addressed that problem with player elimination. I very much enjoy the concept of hunting, as well as all sorts of animals that you could meet up with. Some of them are, like a bear who might hurt you. Some of them are ducks that can't hurt you, but they fly away and all sorts of things. So it's kind of fun to go out hunting and gathering food, and you get pelts. You can gather wood and stone and all that different stuff. And you can build projects. Each character gets a project. And when you complete a project, you get that item. And it could be, the fishing gear or the spear or the shield or a backpack or something like that, that helps you in some capacity. And Flint is one of them that you really need because you want to make fires, but you might not get the flint. So you can try to mill through the projects deck, make as many projects as possible so you can mill through and get your flint so you can make fire, so you can cook food, so you can survive the night with food, as long as you also have water and that kind of stuff. So it's a really neat little concept. And a lot of those items that you get are kind of fun to have. And you have an inventory that you need to manage because most characters can only hold so many items, including your food and water and scrap and wood and all that different stuff. So you have to manage how many items am I going to keep and how many of these food am I going to keep and how much of this water am I going to keep. So there's a really good, strong survival feeling to this game, but it's still a very basic gameplay style, which I like. I actually think it's fun. It's a very fun game as far as a survival game. Very simple, but fun. Now, kind of the point of the game is that it's a story game. You are going through these scenarios and there's some sort of mystery going on in these different territories. Kind of like, like those TV shows like Lost, where you're on the island and you don't know what's going on and you keep going around to different locations and discovering things. And that's what's so neat about the game. That's very clever how they named it Discover Lands Unknown. They have the words discover and unknown in the title, which really is what these stories are, because you have no idea what you could ever expect from these cards. They could throw weird things at you that you didn't expect, like including, spoiler alert, supernatural stuff could potentially happen. And so you don't know what you're going to find when you get to these places. And as a matter of fact, you'll finish scenarios and you have no idea what just happened because it was a weird place and weird things happened and you managed to escape that weird place. So it's kind of cool that way, how like you have to kind of piece together the story in your own mind, because honestly, the story elements aren't that in depth. It's one card that has a little bit of text on it that explains a situation that's happening. But the more of those cards that you find around the board, the more of a picture of what's happening on this island or in these mountains or on this desert or whatever kind of comes together, and you can make assumptions in your own mind and you can sort of piece together a story in your own mind. So this game really relies on your own imagination to bring out the story, because the story in itself is very light. When you start off, the scenarios are very weak, in my opinion. Like the very first one was like, wow, like you go here and you do this and you go there and you do that, the scenario's over. But as the game progresses, and this is why I'm glad that I waited a few months to review it instead of just throwing it out there in the beginning, is like the later scenarios seem to get a little more complex, and they start adding lots of cards that you jump from card to card and different things happen and different items appear, and more of that story kind of comes out in the scenario. It becomes a little more complex of a story. That said, it's still not a robust story that's being told here, but it is fun to go through it and see how it is and use your imagination to figure out what's happening on the island. Now, that said, I'm talking about the scenarios. I do feel it's a little light on content, meaning there are essentially 4 scenarios you can go through. Then there's always a 5th scenario that's a competitive scenario, which is really weird, where I guess you're fighting each other. You want everyone else to die. I really don't feel like playing that one, but there's only 4 scenarios in it. And I think that maybe FFG put themselves in a box with this one, because you look and it's like, okay, there's 2 scenario cards. That doesn't seem that difficult to make another scenario, but all of those scenario cards rely on all of the other components and how they interact with each other and the order at which those cards come. So even though it seems easy to make a scenario for this, you need like a plethora of other cards to add in there to kind of make that whole thing work. It's very deceiving when you first are setting it up. You're like, oh, that's all there is to this scenario? Buh. But more happens behind the scenes. So I think despite the fact that it's only 4 scenarios, it would be difficult to add more for them and probably add to the cost of the game. So it's kind of like a weird like paradox almost that they're into now, is like, oh, we can't add more content because it add more price to the game, but we need more content because there isn't enough content with only 4, because essentially that's 4 plays. You could go back and replay those, because there's a lot of things that I discovered in the scenarios that I could never follow up on. Like I found an item that was a cool, like mystical item, and it said, go to this other place to figure out what happens. And I didn't have time to go there because I was busy with the scenario, or I was busy getting water, or I was busy fighting animals and monsters. So I didn't have time to go follow up on this piece of story that I missed out on. So if you really wanted to, like a choose your own adventure book, go back and see the other paths that you missed. So it's kind of neat in that way. So all in all, I mean, I said a lot, and I'm very positive about this game. I will say again that it is basic. The scenarios aren't super in-depth stories. There's a lot of imagination that has to happen in the game. They don't feel samey, I'll say that. Like each one of them kind of felt a little different in the way they rolled out and the fun things that you find. I don't think it's a great game, but I think it's a good game, and I had a really good time with it. And I think it particularly would be good for family environments because it's very light and easy to get into, not a lot of rules, and the stories aren't very heavy. So I think it's good to follow with those people. But as hobby gamers, myself, Steve and I want to play this game more. As a matter of fact, we're talking about getting another copy because we want to do the snowy mountains, and we want to do the desert, and we want to do the swamps or whatever else there is. We kind of want to. So I think that's kind of an indicator that we love it because we're ready to go get another copy of it already. And I'll give my copy off to somebody else. I really do kind of like this game. And I think it's a really good first step for Fantasy Flight because I think they didn't try to bust their balls with this one. They didn't try to go too far and too complex with their first outing and their unique board games, the whole niche that they're trying to develop here. I think they just tried to do something and see, all right, let's see if this works. And I think it did work. I really do think it did. And I hope that they go the next level and make a bigger game and a more complex game with more in-depth stories in their next outing with this unique stuff, if they end up making more unique stuff. Because Discover Lands Unknown, I'm into it. I like it. It's good.
Thanks so much, everybody. If you've enjoyed this video, please do us a giant favor by subscribing to the channel and clicking that wacky bell icon. If you're into board games, miniatures games, role-playing games, we have a bunch of audio podcasts you might enjoy. You can find those at thesecretcabal.com or on iTunes and Stitcher.